Good afternoon, everybody. 10 years ago, almost to the date, in New Bedford, Massachusetts, there was an Immigration and Customs Enforcement raid on a factory in which approximately 350 immigrants were arrested. Now, Immigration and Customs Enforcement came to this factory. Oddly enough, they were producing jackets, military jackets for the people serving overseas. They came in with helicopters, dogs, weapons of all types, and they arrested 350 men, women, and children. At that time, I was 3 years out of law school, sort of fresh out of law school, and I was working at Greater Boston Legal Services. And we got a call that this raid had occurred. Our managing attorney, who's still the managing attorney there, Nancy Kelly, started to put together a plan. We needed to go in and interview these folks as quickly as possible. So we figured out, Nancy figured out that they were many of them were being detained at a military base in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, which is, oddly enough, a city called, you say in English, ayer. In Spanish, you would say ayer. It's sort of like yesterday. It was like old-fashioned sort of technique to bring people to detention. And so we organized to get down there to the military base. We met with all types of hurdles. They didn't want to let us in. They required us to submit names of the people that we were representing. So we quickly got in touch with families, and we got almost all the names of the people there, and we said we are the representatives of these folks. We get down to the military base, and there's an armed guard. I was in a car with a few different people. We had 6 or 7 attorneys at the time, but we got volunteers from all the different units to come up with us. I was in a car, and I was the lawyer of this car of other paralegals and secretaries going in. We met with an armed guard at the gate, and they said, "You gotta wait." It was cold. We were in a car, and it was freezing cold, and we were waiting outside of this sort of very militarized facility in a suburb in Massachusetts. It was very surreal. Anyways, we get in, and night has fallen, and it's probably 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. We can't bring our car, so they tell us to get in the back of one of those police wagons. You know, there's a pejorative name for it, the paddy wagon. We had to get in back of that and go to another part of the base. We get to the other part of the base, and they take us out of this wagon. And as they're taking us out, they're taking some of the detainees out. And we see that these guys are Central American, many of which are from Guatemala. Indigenous folks, many of them are indigenous. If you know people from Guatemala, Central America, very slight in stature, very meek people. And they have them chained arm in arm like this, and their legs are shackled, and they're pulling them out of a wagon similar to the one we were in. And if one person falls and stumbles, the whole line sort of stumbled similarly. And I'm watching this, my head's down. I almost couldn't watch it. I forced myself to watch it. I had to watch it because I felt as though I needed to let those people know that there's somebody witnessing this tragedy. We walk into a sort of mess hall. It's similar to this, but with barbed wire and floodlights and all of that. And they bring the detainees back to another place, and they make us wait for another hour or so. We're just sort of waiting. And then when they finally bring the detainees out, it's got to be around midnight. They're tired. They look exhausted. It looks like it's hard for them to stand up, and they're standing in a line, presented as if we're part of the problem. The reason why you can't go to sleep is because these attorneys want to talk to you. And it was odd, and just a little aside, I've been practicing now for about 14 years, and we have a relationship with the ICE attorneys that work in Government Center, and we're on different sides of the arguments oftentimes, but we have a working relationship. We respect them as people, and they respect us for the most part. But on this day, that respect, at least on the part of the ICE attorneys, went out the door. They were treating us as if we were breaking the law, as if we were somehow making things harder, troublemakers. I remember at one point I went up to an ICE attorney that I had known, that I respected, and I said, "Sir, we'd like to prioritize speaking with the children first. So if you could bring the children out first, we'd like to talk to those folks first." And he went right up to my face and he yelled at me, saying, "We do not have any children in this facility." Louder than that, though, and more forceful. In fact, they did. We found children in there. DCF helped, the Department of Children and Families helped us find children, and we got them remedies. One such person, I'm helping to wrap up a case with him. He's a citizen now, helping to wrap up a case with him where he's bringing his spouse from El Salvador. But the change in the environment, the change in the way that we saw each other was part of this sort of militarization, this sort of enforcement aspect of the immigration policy that existed at the time. So this was during the Bush era, and what I could say about the difference then as opposed to now. When Bush first took office, the border was much more porous. People came in, there was this catch and release policy, and it's really hard to get numbers because you don't know how many people you released. They just turned around and came back in, and there was not nearly as much border enforcement as we have now. I have some numbers for you as far as that goes. It's something like 9,800, 2001, 9,800 border agents, and then by 2009 we have 20,000 border agents. So during the Bush administration, you would see a lot more of this interior enforcement. You would see rounding up of folks like in New Bedford. We saw smaller scale sweeps here in Massachusetts and Nantucket. Some Brazilians got picked up in Framingham. There was some of the meat factories were raided in Iowa, I believe. So we see a lot, much more of this interior-based enforcement and detention. And what I could say in that regard, and the reason why it was so important for us to get in there is because even if you get arrested and detained, you still have the right to go to a hearing and be heard on the merits of your case. So we wanted to make sure all of these folks, no matter where they were located, had an attorney that could represent them in the event that there was some immigration remedy available to them. So what did immigration do? They took all of these people that were in Fort Devens and they transferred them to Texas within a matter of a couple of days. And I remember hearing the news that the folks that we had gone and interviewed and spent those hours getting their stories were taken and put in a state far away where they had no other resources. I remember coming home and just maybe it was exhaustion, just coming home and crying into my pillow at night. Even to this day, I'm not nervous. I still feel emotional about those events. Part of the emotion comes from, I've done a lot of research on civil wars in Central America, and pictured what it must have been like to be tortured, an indigenous person tortured in Guatemala during the Civil War. During the Guatemalan Civil War, 200,000 people were killed, 83% of which were indigenous Mayans. Why this is not recognized as a genocide globally, I mean, I recognize it as a genocide, I don't know. Why we don't have some remedy here in the United States that allows indigenous Mayans fleeing this genocide some refuge here in the United States, I don't know. But I had that picture going into the detention center, and I realized that what they were seeing here in Massachusetts, very blue state liberal Massachusetts, was probably reminiscent of some of the detention situations they faced in their home countries. And for that reason, I felt my country had failed, that there was a failure in the system, that there was something wrong, it was broken. You know, I still feel that. But what we saw in the transition from the Bush era to the Obama era is we see a lot less of that interior enforcement. And maybe Obama had a heart, and maybe he recognized some of the issues that immigrants face because, in fact, his father's an immigrant. Or maybe Obama was just lucky in that the border was now secure and everybody had been dealt with. Now, what we see a border that is 80% secure by ICE statistics. What I see in my practice is I see people that are already in the system. They're already in the court system and fighting their case. And there was an interesting article in the New York Times concerning the security of the border, comparing it. Some people are calling for a 100% secure border, which is nearly impossible, but comparing it to the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was 95% secure, but we're talking about 96 miles of border. We got 2,000 miles of the Mexican border that's 80% secure. I would call that pretty secure. And I think Obama rode this tide such that he no longer focused on the interior. He had a new set of priorities. He was going to prioritize criminal aliens, and people with outstanding deportation orders, and continue the security at the border. But now, and what I can say in regards to Bush and Obama, oddly enough, their immigration policies are very similar. The idea being that if you start with enforcement, then maybe after we're secure, we secured that border, then maybe we could then start talking about comprehensive immigration reform. So there was a little bit of that hope or the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think Democrats and Republicans went along with this idea, okay, let's secure the border, and then we'll talk about it. So what I think, this is my opinion, is that Obama began getting frustrated with the fact that he secured the border and we didn't get comprehensive immigration reform. 2010, we see a bipartisan bill that's only that has majority support and just didn't have enough support to pass filibuster. The Republicans held up the 2010 bill. With that frustration, Obama moves to executive orders. 2012, Obama provides a pathway for the so-called dreamers in signing an executive order called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. This was an effort to jumpstart the conversation once again, to at least signing the Dreamer Bill or more inclusive comprehensive immigration reform. After that, 2013, we have the so-called Gang of Eight, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, come up with a bill, pass it to the Senate, and gets held up in the House of Representatives because Boehner didn't want to bring it to a vote. He is basically held hostage by a group of very extreme, I wouldn't even say conservatives, just an extreme group within the Republican Party that threatened to do his speakership harm if he brought it to a vote. That's the opinion of many folks anyway. So anyways, what we have is comprehensive immigration reform stalled in the water, and the enforcement continues. The enforcement continues, and yet we never feel, or we're never getting messages that, in fact, we are secure. And with this enforcement, what we saw is we began to see a clearer picture of who it was that was entering the United States. And no matter what Trump tells you, the people that are coming into the United States, what the numbers will show, is we see an increase in unaccompanied minors. These are children entering the United States without their parents. And we see an increase in family units. A lot of people are coming from Central America, and actually we're seeing a shift from the majority of people coming from what we call the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, and fewer Mexicans coming. We see a shift in the population. A lot more women and a lot more children. They're not Mexican rapists, that's for sure. They're not radical Islamic terrorists, that's for sure. They're women and children, in fact, fleeing the same things that Bush is talking about, Trump is talking about happening here in the United States. What we see in 2009, we see 20,000 unaccompanied minors entering the United States. By 2014, 68,000 unaccompanied minors entering the United States. Similarly, 2013, 15,000 family units coming into the United States. 2014, the very next year, 70,000 family units coming into the United States. At the same time, we're seeing a decrease in the number of people attempting to enter the United States. That is all to say that the border is secure. These people that are coming into the United States are coming to the United States expressing a fear many times. And they're not the type of folks that you hear about being a sort of threat to our security. But what Trump is doing with his rhetoric about Mexican murderers and rapists and radical Islamic terrorists is not only is he instilling fear in the United States, but he's making the case for increased enforcement. And in fact, just this week we hear him reiterate his need for 15,000 more border agents to secure the southern border. And of course, we all have heard about the wall. But what I would argue is that we tried enforcement-only policies for the last 40 years or so. We could say, really, with the Reagan administration is when you get the need for a work permit, and it's a relatively modern issue. But for the last 4 decades, we've tried enforcement-only policies, deterrent policies, and it doesn't work. It's inefficient. Not only is it inefficient, it's misunderstood by many people. It's misunderstood by people abroad, and it's misunderstood by people in the United States. People in the United States certainly don't feel more secure because the border is more enforced. And people that are coming in feel a sense of instability, having to have an immigration case pending for sometimes 5 years without knowing at the end whether or not they will be able to continue living with their family and continue studying or continue working, or whether they'll be have the rug pulled out from under them and be deported right away. classic example of cases that I have now. Kids that have come when they're 15 years old, in high school, completed high school. If you win the case, fine, you're done in maybe a year. If the case is a little bit more problematic, it could take it, like I said, 5 years. When you're talking about that age group of 15-year-old to a 20-year-old, a lot happens in that time. You go to high school, you learn English, you get some job skills maybe, or you enter into a university. And if at that, and I have cases like this, if at the end of that 5 years you don't know what is going to happen, it's not likely that you're going to be able to focus such that you can reach your full potential. Right? And who does that really affect? That affects all of us, right? We have the opportunity to take advantage of the potential of all of the people that we collaborate and live with in the United States. But with this enforcement deterrent idea and policy, we as a nation are unable to embrace populations that we have that exist here. What I think we need is we need a clearer path to citizenship. We need to step away from the deterrent-based system and focus more on a reward-based system or a merit-based system that recognizes the need for not only a robust labor force, but the diversity of thought and creative ideas that comes from collaborating from people from all over the world. And when I think back to what made me so sad, why I would cry in my pillow when I saw that Bedford raid, it wasn't really me thinking politically about it. It wasn't me thinking, well, it's just a very inefficient system, and I'm so sad that our system is so efficient. No, it wasn't that. It wasn't that the humanity, the inhumanity that I experienced, that wasn't it either. I mean, it was part of it. But really, what made me sad was the idea that I was seeing the physical manifestation of policy that contradicts what I feel is at the core of our 240-year experiment that is America. To be sure, the founders of this country committed treason when they decided to carve out a piece of land for themselves. But they were also in a situation where they had to commit those treasonous acts and preserve the rule of law. And how did they do that? They justified it with the thoughts of the philosophers during the Enlightenment. There are certain things that they said shouldn't be taken away. They talked about natural rights, God-given rights, right? Inalienable rights, rights that cannot be taken away. They were building a nation that transcends the traditional notion of nationhood. And to do that, they needed people that were courageous enough to transcend traditional groupings. They needed people that were able to move beyond race, ethnicity, nation, religion. They needed this because they knew that we needed a collaboration in the United States. A collaboration to seek something higher. The classic is the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They wanted to create a space in pursuit of a common good. And in fact, the Declaration of Independence talks about, I got to get the correct wording. I don't want to misread the Declaration of Independence, God forbid, right? So it talked about repeated injuries and usurpations of the king. And one of those repeated injuries is this. I'll read it word for word. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage the migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. In the Declaration of Independence was this idea that we needed a population in order to create a country that transcended the notion of nation. With that, the American dream is not just the dream of an individual to do all that he can do, to be the best that he can be. The American dream is the dream of a nation. The American dream is the idea that as a nation, with people that are courageous enough to collaborate with people that are different from them, we can come together for the benefit of all. And that is why